personally seen her drones drifting onto my property, constant, intrusive, and frankly.
Montecito is not just a zip code, it is a covenant. An unspoken agreement among the ultra-wealthy that privacy is sacred, discretion is enforced socially, and anyone who violates the code is corrected quietly or removed entirely. This sunlit enclave does not tolerate chaos, no matter how famous the source. That is why the latest allegations have landed like a controlled detonation. Not because they involve Meghan Markle, but because they come from someone Montecito trusts to speak only when lines are crossed. Rob Lowe is not a newcomer chasing relevance. He's embedded, decades deep. The kind of resident whose presence predates trends, whose reputation is built on coexistence rather than conquest. When someone like Lowe allegedly says a neighbor bullied the community, people listen. When he claims drones were used to spy on private homes, the conversation shifts from gossip to governance. According to accounts now circulating within elite circles, Meghan's relationship with Montecito did not erode overnight, it frayed slowly. At first, there was curiosity, then tolerance, then irritation, and finally, resistance. The kind that forms not on social media, but in closed-door meetings, petitions, and formal complaints. What makes this different from celebrity feuds is scale. This is not one neighbor complaining. This is an entire neighborhood signaling exhaustion.
The irony is impossible to ignore. A couple who left the United Kingdom citing relentless intrusion now stands accused of replicating that very behavior in their adopted sanctuary. Drones, residents allege, hovered over properties. Cameras captured moments never meant for public consumption. And when confronted, responses reportedly came not with apologies, but with silence, denial, or legal pressure. In Montecito, that is not defense, that is escalation. Rob Lowe's alleged account of spotting drones near his home during private family moments crystallized what others had whispered for months. These were not toys, they were professional-grade devices, silent, persistent, purposeful. And for neighbors accustomed to total autonomy within their hedges and gates, it crossed a line that wealth cannot smooth over. But the drone allegations are only the sharp edge of a larger complaint. Residents describe an atmosphere shift, roads blocked without warning, security behaving with entitlement rather than cooperation, attempts at neighborly gestures rebuffed with cold protocol. The cumulative effect was alienation, not just social distance, but defensive unity among those who felt their sanctuary was under threat. This is where Montecito's power becomes visible. It does not shout, it documents. Complaints are logged, patterns are established, authorities are notified, and eventually, action follows. Santa Barbara County officials and federal aviation regulators reportedly took interest not because of celebrity drama, but because rules may have been broken repeatedly. If eviction proceedings truly entered the conversation, that alone signals severity. Montecito does not evict lightly, especially not royalty-adjacent figures. Such measures imply that mediation failed, warnings were ignored, and patience expired. At its core, this story is not about drones, it is about boundaries. Who respects them? Who assumes exemption? And what happens when a community decides fame no longer justifies disruption? What transformed irritation into organized resistance was not celebrity resentment, but pattern recognition. Montecito residents are accustomed to famous neighbors. Movie stars, media moguls, tech billionaires coexist there precisely because they understand one rule: visibility is optional, intrusion is forbidden. According to multiple accounts, Meghan's conduct violated that rule repeatedly enough to trigger collective action. At first, incidents were dismissed as misunderstandings. A drone sighting here, a blocked road there, security behaving with unnecessary force. In most neighborhoods, these would remain isolated annoyances. In Montecito, they accumulate. Neighbors talk, notes are compared, timelines align. And once alignment occurs, discretion gives way to documentation.
Rob Lowe's role, according to insiders, was catalytic rather than theatrical. He did not posture, he corroborated. His experiences mirrored what others had quietly logged: drones hovering beyond property lines, filming without consent, lingering longer than coincidence allows. When someone of Lowe's standing confirms shared grievances, hesitation dissolves. The issue stops being personal and becomes communal. Residents began formalizing complaints, not emotionally but procedurally. Reports were filed with local authorities, FAA inquiries were triggered, security footage was submitted, flight paths were noted. What might have once been dismissed as paranoia became evidence-based concern. This is the point at which Montecito's patience typically ends. The bullying allegations followed a similar trajectory. Neighbors describe attempts to raise concerns that were met not with conversation, but with intimidation. Legal language deployed prematurely, cold disengagement replacing neighborly acknowledgement. In elite communities, social correction usually precedes legal escalation. When the reverse occurs, it signals entitlement rather than protection. Accounts of residents receiving cease and desist letters over minor disputes hardened opposition. This was no longer about privacy management, it was about power assertion. The perception formed that Megan's team operated under the assumption that status insulated them from reciprocity. That assumption proved fatal. Community meetings shifted tone. Environmental discussions gave way to behavioral enforcement. Longtime residents who rarely involved themselves in disputes began attending. Petitions circulated. Signatures accumulated quietly. This was not mob behavior, it was institutional pressure applied patiently. Authorities reportedly responded with caution, aware of the high-profile nature of the case. But regulations do not bend for titles. Drone usage laws are explicit. Repeated violations invite scrutiny regardless of who operates the equipment. When federal oversight enters a local dispute, resolution accelerates. What complicates matters is the Sussexes' own history. Their public battle against paparazzi drones in the UK created a narrative of victimhood around aerial intrusion. That history now frames the current allegations harshly. To be accused of deploying similar tactics undermines moral authority and credibility simultaneously. Prince Harry's role remains opaque. Some allege awareness, others suggest compartmentalization, but silence from his side has only intensified speculation. In tightly managed narratives, silence is interpreted as consent, confusion, or fracture. None of those interpretations benefit cohesion. By the time eviction whispers surfaced, many residents reportedly felt relief rather than triumph. Montecito does not enjoy conflict, it resolves it. Removal is not punishment, it is restoration. The goal is not humiliation, but equilibrium. If these proceedings advance, they will mark an extraordinary moment, not because a celebrity is displaced, but because a community enforced its standards against someone who believed exemption was permanent. This section of the saga reveals a simple truth. In places governed by quiet power, fame grants access only until it disrupts order. Once authorities became involved, the narrative shifted decisively from social tension to structural consequence. This is the point where celebrity insulation typically fails. Regulations do not negotiate with reputation. They respond to frequency, documentation, and escalation. According to sources familiar with the process, warnings were issued before any drastic measures were considered. Compliance was expected. It did not materialize. Drone activity sits at the center of this escalation because it converts discomfort into enforceable violation. FAA regulations are explicit. No unauthorized aerial surveillance over private property, no repeated incursions, no ambiguity about consent. When multiple residents submit corroborated reports, enforcement becomes inevitable. The accumulation matters more than intent. Pattern outweighs explanation. What unsettled Montecito officials most was not a single drone flight, but persistence. Repeated incidents imply operational purpose. This is where speculation about content creation gained traction. Neighbors began questioning whether their private lives were being transformed into background footage, whether candid moments were being captured for projects they never consented to participate in. That perception alone fractures trust permanently. Legal experts note that California's anti-paparazzi statutes are designed to protect exactly this scenario. Ironically, laws often cited by the Sussexes in past privacy battles now frame the accusations against them. The reversal is stark. Advocacy loses force when mirrored behavior appears. Sympathy evaporates when precedent contradicts posture. As scrutiny intensified, officials reportedly expanded their review beyond drones. Land use permits, security protocols, noise ordinances, road access. What began as one issue triggered a comprehensive compliance audit. In affluent communities, this is standard procedure once credibility is questioned. Enforcement becomes holistic. The phrase eviction proceedings carries dramatic weight, but in practice it often reflects a graduated process. Notices, deadlines, opportunities to rectify. Sources suggest mediation was attempted, meetings were held, conditions outlined. The implication is clear. Resolution was offered before removal was considered. When those efforts stall, authorities move forward. For Megan, this moment threatens more than residents. It undermines the narrative architecture she has built since leaving royal life. Montecito was symbolic. It represented escape, autonomy, reinvention. To be pushed out not by tabloids but by neighbors reframes that story entirely. It suggests not persecution but incompatibility. Financial implications deepen the stakes. Relocation from a property of this magnitude involves loss, not just logistical inconvenience. Real estate markets respond to controversy. Buyers hesitate. Valuations soften. Combined with reports of stalled media deals, the timing is punishing. Prince Harry's positioning grows more complicated. His brand emphasizes service, humility, and reform. Association with community conflict erodes that alignment. Silence may be strategic, but it leaves space for interpretation. Distance may protect, but it also signals fracture. Neither option restores trust quickly. Public reaction mirrors this complexity. Some defend the couple, citing relentless scrutiny. Others argue that privacy is a two-way obligation. The dominant sentiment, however, is fatigue. Fatigue with conflict, fatigue with contradiction, fatigue with narratives that collapse under their own weight. Montecito's message is not vindictive, it is procedural. You may live here if you live like us. Fame does not excuse disruption. Advocacy does not override compliance. Boundaries apply universally. And when those boundaries are crossed repeatedly, even royalty is asked to move on. With the community line now firmly drawn, attention turns to what this moment exposes beyond Montecito. Because evictions are never just about geography. They are about patterns reaching their breaking point. And in this case, the pattern critics point to predates California entirely. For years, Meghan's post-royal strategy has relied on a carefully balanced equation: visibility without vulnerability, influence without intrusion, control without accountability. Montecito was supposed to be the controlled environment where that balance finally held. No tabloids, no palace leaks, no rigid protocol, just curated freedom. But freedom, especially in elite enclaves, operates on mutual restraint. When one party is perceived as extracting more than they give, equilibrium collapses. What troubles observers most is the contrast between messaging and behavior. Privacy has been the Sussex's moral high ground since 2020. It justified lawsuits, interviews, relocations, and severed relationships. To now face accusations of surveillance, even indirectly, destabilizes that foundation. Not because drones are uniquely scandalous, but because symbolism matters. Tools communicate intent, whether intended or not. Industry insiders note that Hollywood has little tolerance for neighbor drama. Executives may overlook controversy, but not friction that spills into their own circles. Montecito is not just a zip code, it's a networking ecosystem. When respected residents express discomfort, doors quietly close, invitations stop coming, calls go unanswered. Reputation doesn't crash, it erodes.
This erosion coincides with a precarious moment professionally. With major contracts nearing expiration and few confirmed renewals, perception matters more than ever. Studios invest in reliability. Platforms invest in goodwill. Allegations of bullying, entitlement, or boundary pushing are poison in negotiations, even when unproven. Risk assessment is brutal, and sympathy rarely survives it. Prince Harry's trajectory complicates matters further. His remaining public credibility rests heavily on his separation from perceived excess. The more this story frames him as complicit, aware, silent, or approving, the harder that distinction becomes to maintain. Allies note his increasing solo appearances may be intentional distancing, but distance without clarification invites speculation rather than closure. Then there is the royal dimension. While Buckingham Palace remains officially silent, insiders are undoubtedly watching closely. Every controversy that reinforces narratives of instability strengthens institutional resolve to disengage permanently. Reconciliation requires plausibility. This saga does not offer it. What emerges instead is a portrait of isolation. A couple once welcomed as symbols of modern reinvention, now navigating resistance from the very environment chosen to escape resistance. It is not persecution when neighbors enforce shared rules. It is not exile when compliance is the cost of admission. Public sentiment reflects this shift. Online discourse shows diminishing patience. Even former supporters express confusion. How does a story so rooted in privacy repeatedly generate conflict? Why do sanctuaries keep turning hostile? At some point, repetition invites reassessment. Montecito's significance lies in its neutrality. This is not Britain. This is not the press. This is not the monarchy. These are peers, wealthy, influential, disinclined to tolerate disruption. When they push back, it reframes everything. If eviction proceeds, it will not be remembered as a legal footnote. It will be remembered as the moment the American reset failed. Not dramatically, procedurally, quietly, irreversibly. Because reinvention only works when behavior evolves alongside the narrative. At its core, this Montecito controversy isn't about drones, petitions, or even eviction paperwork. It's about credibility and how quickly it evaporates when private conduct collides with public narrative. For years, Meghan's story has been framed as a fight against intrusion, a principled stand for dignity in the face of relentless scrutiny. That framing only holds if the moral line remains intact. Once neighbors, not tabloids, not palace courtiers, accuse you of crossing it, the story inverts. What makes this moment so damaging is that it doesn't come from enemies. Rob Lowe is not a royal traditionalist. Montecito is not hostile territory. These are peers who benefit from discretion, not chaos. When figures like Lowe step forward reluctantly and pointedly, it signals that informal channels failed long before formal action began. Eviction, if finalized, would merely be the paperwork following a social verdict already rendered.
Hollywood, unlike monarchy, does not issue proclamations. It signals through absence. The quiet disappearance of invitations, the cooling of collaborations, the slow recalibration of who is considered worth the complication. This is how influence actually ends in elite circles, not with scandal, but with inconvenience. And inconvenience is unforgivable. For Prince Harry, the implications are deeply personal. His post-royal identity has leaned heavily on the idea that he chose peace over power. Montecito was the physical proof of that choice. If the sanctuary collapses, so does the symbolism. Allies may argue he is collateral damage, but history rarely makes that distinction. Proximity becomes complicity in public memory. The silence from their camp only sharpens the impact. In past crises, statements arrived swiftly, framed carefully, litigated publicly. Here, there is hesitation. That suggests either legal vulnerability or strategic paralysis. Neither inspires confidence. In the absence of denial, narratives harden. Communities move on. Decisions get made without you in the room. Meanwhile, the broader American experiment begins to look unsustainable. The Sussex brand was built on controlled access, selective openness paired with moral authority. But control requires trust. Once that trust erodes at the neighborhood level, rebuilding it at the national or global level becomes exponentially harder. Audiences forgive ambition, they do not forgive hypocrisy. There is also a cautionary lesson embedded here for celebrity culture itself. Privacy is not something you declare, it is something you earn through restraint. Montecito's unspoken rules apply to everyone, precisely because everyone there has something to lose. When someone is perceived as exempting themselves, the response is swift and collective. If this chapter ends with relocation, it won't be framed as escape, it will be framed as consequence. Another address, another reset, another attempt to outrun reputation rather than repair it. The problem with that strategy is simple. Patterns travel. History suggests this won't end loudly. There will be no dramatic press conference, no final confrontation, just a property listing, a moving convoy, and a quiet understanding among those left behind that balance has been restored. And that may be the most damning outcome of all. Because when a community exhales after you leave, it tells a story no statement ever could. If you want the real story, not the polished headlines, not the PR spin, but what's actually happening behind the gates and hedges, make sure you subscribe to the Royal Roast. Like this video if you believe power should never excuse behavior, and drop your thoughts in the comments because this story is far from over. New leaks, new witnesses, and new consequences are already lining up, and when they surface, you'll hear it here first. Sharp, unfiltered, and unapologetically honest.